mission, solving mysteries in the night. Chasing shadows, finding answers, shining bright light. No one's left behind, in the darkness all alone. With a heart like a siren, she brings the lost ones home. Silent cries in the dark no longer have to be. For justice wheels keep turning, granny on the beat. Broken voices find their power, call out hope again. When Granny's crime busters ride, no victims left in vain. Bravery in her veins, truth she won't disguise. With a fire in her eyes, she's got nothing to deny. Granny fights for justice, never backs down from the call. For the voiceless and the missing, she'll stand tall.
Hello, hello, everybody. How is everybody doing this fine Sunday night? Hello, Ginger. Good to see you. K9. Good to see you. Awesome. Everybody's doing good tonight. Let's get started with our spotlight on the missing. Today we have Hunter Gilbert. Hunter's been missing since April 17th, 2025. Last seen in Knoxville, Tennessee. So it hasn't even been a month yet, guys. 5 feet 9 inches tall, 120 pounds, black hair, and brown eyes. That's all we really know about him. But if you know anything, 911, Knoxville Police Department, or 1-800-GBI-FIND. The second one we have for today is Tiara Brown. She's been missing since April 22nd, 2025. Last seen in Knoxville, Tennessee, 16-year-old female, 5 feet 8 inches tall, 120 pounds, black hair, brown eyes. Obviously, her hair is dyed in this photo, so could be still dyed. We don't know. Again, another one that has been missing a month yet. So if you know anything, call Knoxville Police Department 911 or 1-800-GBI-FIND. So let me get that off of there. We are going to continue on. I think we'll be able to finish it up tonight. We'll try to make sure we do. On Sebastian's abduction, because, guys, let's face it, we pretty much know that's what happened, right? It was an abduction. One way or the other, that's what happened. We just don't know for sure who abducted him. I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to continue on. And remember that the link for this video is in the description of my video.
Having gone through the story of Chris Proudfoot and Nina Gomez's relationship and how faith affected it, I want to turn your attention back to the original question at hand. Is it possible that Sebastian moving out of the Proudfoot home had something to do with Faith potentially moving in? Chris has been adamant that this is not the case, but there is a pretty big piece of evidence that he has not been able to overcome, and to my knowledge, that he has not denied. Chris Proudfoot told Seth Rogers that he did not want Sebastian around his daughter.
Good question there, guys. And yes, I do think that Sebastian did not want, or that Chris did not want Sebastian around his daughter. And I honestly believe that that's the reason why Sebastian is gone today. Hello, Brenda Joe. Show Poodles, good to see you. Noni, good to see you. I'm just checking if I missed anybody. we got everybody. But yes, in my opinion, all alleged, I believe that's why Sebastian is gone. We've talked about the fact that Chris likes to lie to himself. I really think he thought he had a chance to get custody of Faith. But I don't believe he had a chance at all. Oh, he was fighting hard, wasn't he? And now with the child missing and with all of his anger and rude comments and his just his overall behavior this last year, I don't know how he can even think that any judge is going to give him custody of a child. He's already had to have anger management courses. Obviously, he didn't pay attention. He had to have parenting classes already. That's all on his record. That's all on his record. All right, let's continue on.
Speaking on the Pascal show on April 5th, Seth said that people were asking Chris why he didn't want my son around his daughter. And he kept telling me that if people kept asking the question, he's going to answer it. As for what he meant by this, Seth elaborated that Chris said that if he tells them, people will stop looking for Sebastian. Pascal then clarified, so you're telling me that he looks at Sebastian like some kind of predator, to which Seth simply replied, yeah. As for why, Seth tied it to something that happened to Sebastian under Chris and Katie's watch while they were still living in San Diego. Seth mentioned during a few different interviews that when Sebastian was 8, Chris and Katie left him alone with a 13-year-old boy, and as a result, Sebastian had his innocence taken from him. He used more explicit terms at other times, but I'm sure you can grasp what I'm suggesting here. Seth went on to explain that he felt that Sebastian had not received the proper kind of care or counseling, and that as a result, he hadn't properly processed or recovered from the traumatic experience. My son is a victim, he said, and if victims don't get the proper help, they repeat because all of a sudden they think it's normal. And studies show that victims of childhood sexual abuse will go on to become offenders themselves. So Seth?
That's right. They do, unfortunately. But guys, I want to remind everybody of something. Whose mother is a registered SA offender? Right. And, I know that Seth would not have wanted that to be made public, but he wasn't gonna bow down to Chris's threats. And I have a lot of respect for him for that reason. I mean, do you really honestly believe that Seth would have wanted this to come out? Chris was holding it over his head. Well, it backfired on Chris, didn't it? Backfired on him. That's not the only time it backfired on him. I'm sure that she has provided good information to the judge. I wouldn't even be surprised if she doesn't use Seth as a witness. In my opinion, CP doesn't like to lose anything. I don't think he really wants Faith. He would have had to give up his work to be home with her. Yeah. Well, no. I don't think he wouldn't have had to give up his work to be home with her. Judges typically don't penalize, especially with the kind of money that he makes. Judges typically would not penalize him for that, as long as that, like Katie was home with him. I don't think that would have penalized him, but I agree with you. He didn't want her to begin with. His mother wanted her. And even if he was going to keep her, I honestly believe it was just to hurt Nina more than anything, right? Because think about it, he tried to keep her back when they were in Hendersonville. He did everything he could, but Nina won. Oh, that's not going to go down well with the Proudfoots, is it? You know, because you're right. He doesn't like to lose anything. When his threats don't work, he doesn't like that. Yeah, exactly. You said it. She's a tool to get back at Nina. That's what I think. Gotcha, Noni. Good. I'm glad it worked. Yep. Mother truck and billboards. Did CP steal your audio? That's funny. That's funny. But yes, what he's saying here is true. If they don't get help, they could go on to become offenders themselves. We've seen it happen over and over, haven't we? But so, which makes me wonder, did Katie ever get the help she needed? Just saying. Did she get the help she needed? Something to think about, guys. I don't know. Something to think about.
Is completely right about this. He continued, "My son's autistic, and if he doesn't get the proper help, we don't want him to become that. And there's multiple different ways, but if you're not certified in the proper way to get him help, you're just going to make it worse." And the implication here, while never explicitly stated, is that whatever therapist or psychiatrist he was seeing did not have the correct credentials or training for this kind of trauma. Pascal was understandably confused as to what Sebastian had done to cause Chris to see him as, quote, some sort of monster, and Seth explained that Chris doesn't see him as innocent because Sebastian had done some questionable things. In Seth's opinion, these were more issues of Sebastian having autism and not understanding social cues or personal boundaries. So the things that Sebastian was doing, according to Seth, were more along the lines of, while in the men's room, revealing a certain part of his anatomy and asking other men what theirs looked like, which Seth said was innocent kid stuff. Probably not the best terminology, but with autism, he's not really wrong. I'm sure there are other people here watching that remember in grade school that, sometimes the autistic kids, especially back in the 2000s when this stuff wasn't nearly as well understood or normalized, sometimes would pull their pants all the way down in the bathroom. I would be willing to bet just about every guy who went to public school has experienced that. It was never a predatory thing. It was not understanding that that's not what you do at that age or in public. In any case, so far as Seth was aware, Sebastian had never done anything like this to Faith, who he says Sebastian saw, or sees, if we're being optimistic here, as a younger sister.
So, I'm a girl. I never had that happen to me. So I don't know. He said every guy's probably had that happen. I don't know. But we don't know what all went on in the home, in the school. We don't know, right? I honestly believe that Chris would intentionally make things sound worse than they are, though. That's my opinion. Oh, I agree with you. Very vengeful people. I'm not sure. She sounded like whoever took her just spoiled her rotten, so to speak. Her grandparents did, but I don't think before that she was. Because if I remember what Yada said, once her grandparents took her in, they spoiled her rotten, gave her anything she wanted. But I had heard that, that's why she was taken away from her mother. I doubt KP did, and I felt like the service could have hardened her and made her more jaded to the world. Yeah. I'm sure the service did harden her. It's kind of what they do, right? Make their people tough because they know what they're going to face, in wars and that kind of thing. So that's kind of their MO, right? That's what they do.
And this was confirmed in Nina Gomez's interview. Both Nina and Seth told separate interviewers that Sebastian and Faith had a normal sibling relationship, and they talked to each other on FaceTime, even though they weren't blood relatives. They just saw each other as siblings. And as I said, to my knowledge, Chris has not denied this conversation with Seth taking place, nor has he made a statement contradicting Seth's claims. Katie, on the other
hand, and I just want to go ahead and say this. If Sebastian would have done something inappropriate to Nina, I honestly believe Nina would have said something in that 2-hour interview that she did. It wasn't even really an interview, though. It was just her talking. A 2-hour video that she did on Trevor Lee's channel. I think she would have said something. I think she would have said it kindly. But I also think that would have been a point of contention for her for Faith going to live in that home, right? She would have made it a point of contention. She never, ever alluded to that, ever. Instead, she talked about how they FaceTimed each other, like brother and sister. And yes, Chris has never contradicted that. He never has. Not that it would matter because he lies, so we don't believe him, right? In our opinion.
hand has. Her response, however, was a Facebook comment that said that the boy who assaulted Sebastian was not 13, that they did not allow Sebastian to be abused, and that he did get help. What she didn't do was clarify the boy's age, which makes me think that he was probably closer in age to 13 than to 8. She also didn't name the therapist Sebastian was seeing, nor did she give any indication of what that therapist's credentials were. On the other hand, she did admit that Seth was involved in the therapy. And in my opinion, that actually makes Seth's argument stronger, because if he was involved in the therapy, then he is familiar with the treatment and has every right to believe it was inadequate. In addition to that, rather than clarifying anything that she said about the situation, she added that Seth was banned from the base for his violent tendencies. And then she said something weird. According to her, Sebastian was seeing therapists to help him with trauma from Seth's abuse and the trauma from being assaulted by this child. That part struck me because there appears to be no record of Seth ever abusing Sebastian outside of his 2016 divorce proceedings with Katie Proudfoot. You may recall that earlier in this video, I implied that certain aspects of Nina's account of her relationship with Chris closely mirrored certain actions, certain things that happened during Seth and Katie's divorce. I've been unable to find the court records from those proceedings, but what I have been able to find is a set of documents from that period in which Katie makes some allegations and Seth responds. For some background, Katie and Seth were married on June 21st, 2008, and Sebastian was born on December 7th of that same year. The circumstances of how they met are a little murky, as are the details of their marriage, but what I do know is that on February 26, 2016, exactly 8 years to the day before Sebastian went missing, Katie filed for divorce. On August 29th of that year, Katie had forcibly removed Seth from the home via a temporary restraining order on the basis of a number of allegations. Listing Sebastian as a protected party, Katie accused Seth of physically abusing Sebastian, writing that since returning from deployment in December, I have witnessed a multitude of events from Seth. Among these were claims that she had seen him hit Sebastian in the head, neck, and back, and grab him with both hands, lift his entire body up, slam him down, and then proceed to beat him. In addition, she said that...
So, guys, do you ever see Seth being capable of doing something like that to his child? Because I don't, ever. And actually Nina had stated that Chris had done those things. So where was Katie getting this from? I think they did, but I don't know when. Probably when they were first together, before they were even married. I'll bet KP had some coaching in how to get Seth out of the house. I bet she was. All she had to do was read Nina's allegations, and she just mirrored them. Even Aiden is picking up on that, right? He's picking up on the fact that they're very similar. So I think she mirrored them. I don't see Seth ever being, absolutely no. Absolutely not. He's not capable of that. I don't feel he is. He bonded with his son. He loved his son. And he's not the one that had to take anger classes and had to take parenting classes. So that tells you something right there. I'm just saying, he's not the one that had to do that, So she could accuse all she wanted. The judge still gave, even in the divorce, the judge still gave Seth joint custody. Now, do you really think that the judge would have given Sebastian or given Seth joint custody without any kind of parenting or anger classes or anything else if the judge felt that those things had really happened? Not only that, there was no record of any kind of abuse before that, right? Where there's record after record on Chris with Nina. Maybe CP wrote the separation plan. He could have. He said that KP and Seth's parenting plan was written by him. So, yeah. He mirrored things. Right? Oh, that guy, the more we get to know about him, the more we're reminded of things that he did, the more that I just can't stomach him. In my opinion, I can't. I don't know how any woman ever could. I just don't get it. It blows my mind.
Seth, on many cases, whipped him with a belt, not paying attention to where he was hitting because he was so angry. She also wrote, neighbors informed me that during my duty days, the days she had to be on base, they have seen Sebastian on multiple occasions coming outside the house crying and looking for his dad. And this was allegedly because Seth had been gone for long periods of time, and neighbors had to tell Sebastian to go inside and lock the door, but none of them called CPS. Along with the allegations of physical abuse, Katie also accused Seth of inappropriate sexual behavior. Specifically, she said that Seth would on a regular...
And guys, listen, if the neighbors would have come out, if they saw that kind of thing. Don't you think that with all this publicity in this case, that those neighbors would have come out and said, yes, this happened? I mean, the neighbors in the Stafford Court area came out and talked about things that Chris did to Sebastian, didn't they? So where are these neighbors that said all this? Yet no CPS reports were filed. CPS wasn't called. She is as much a liar as her husband is. They're both chronic liars. And the problem is they believe their lies, but they can't keep them straight. That's why they're not consistent. Their stories are not consistent.
Basis just walk into the living room and get naked, not caring that Sebastian sees this. There were also claims of emotional manipulation on Seth's part associated with their divorce and Sebastian's anxiety over his parents splitting up. Apparently, Seth would tell Sebastian, this is all because mommy doesn't want to love daddy anymore. Katie was the one who filed for divorce, just to be clear. That is in the San Diego court records. I was able to find that. In addition to all of this were assertions that Sebastian's teachers were uncomfortable with Seth and requested that the principal be present during any meetings involving him. She said that while they were explaining Sebastian's condition to one of his teachers, which included fluid on his brain, a pocket of fluid on the right side of his brain, Seth became irritated with Sebastian and hit him on the head in front of a faculty member. She claims that after she criticized him for this, he told her it wasn't that hard and that people need to stop telling him how to raise his son. There were also claims about CPS and social workers being involved, with Katie saying that Sebastian was very afraid of his father. She said both she and the social worker had witnessed events like Sebastian waking up in the middle of the night kicking and screaming, and that once at school he wet himself and was terrified of what would happen if Seth found out. Sebastian was also supposedly afraid that Seth would beat him if he made a mistake, though Katie did not elaborate on what kind of mistakes these would be. She did.
Sounds more like Sebastian was afraid of Chris. She's mirroring everything that happened in her home with Chris, in my opinion. That's my opinion. I just don't. Where's the documentation for any of that, right? And Aiden's not saying there is documentation for any of that because it didn't happen. It didn't happen. So in my opinion, Katie, if you want us to believe it, provide documentation because we're not going to believe you. Just not going to happen. All right, let's see what I missed here. CP told that in his rant about the Blipboards telling Seth how in their parenting plan, how Seth couldn't speak badly about KP. Oh, yeah, I know. It's funny. But I just find that so funny. Yeah, like Chris of all people should be writing this stupid parenting plan and, not talk badly. Oh, whatever. Borderline personality disorder is one where they mirror others. Yep. Yep. Hello, Salty Gigi. Good to see you. Welcome in. MNJ, welcome. Good to see you. KP definitely adjusts her behavior according to those she is around, speech and all. Yeah, I think she does. Deflection. I agree. I agree 100%. But yeah, I will not ever believe the stuff that Katie accused Seth of because there's no documentation for any of it. None. The judge would not have given Seth custody. He wouldn't, especially not without a parenting plan or anger management courses. And he would not have done that. He wouldn't have given him joint custody. Guys, I know this. Anyone that's been through a divorce with children knows that. All right, let's continue on.
Did say that she had arranged for Sebastian to see a therapist because of this trauma, and even said that Sebastian was suffering from PTSD related to this abuse. Finally, she accused Seth of manipulating her communications and preventing her from speaking to anyone, including her own family, without him listening in. It may be that that was put in there to explain why she hadn't told anyone about the abuse, why she hadn't sought any sort of outside help, because to this point, there had been no police reports, no doctor's visits, nothing. Altogether,
No police reports, no documents, nothing. She didn't tell her family. Well, isn't that convenient? Guys, if there was that kind of abuse, any mother would shout it from the rooftops and would leave them. Well, I'm going to say most mothers, because Katie isn't a mother in my opinion. I'm going to say most mothers, right? Because in my opinion, Katie never bonded with this child. Seth is the one that bonded with him because he was the one raising him while Katie was in the Navy. He's the one that had the bond from the time that he was a baby until the time he went missing.
it paints a pretty dark portrait of Seth, but not one without some questionable claims, which is why there is a process before a temporary restraining order becomes a domestic violence restraining order. As part of that process, Seth submitted a response to Katie's allegations, in which he denied some things and argued that others didn't warrant a domestic violence restraining order. The hearing for which was set for September 16th, 2016. Seth wrote that Katie's request for a restraining order is based upon the following, then listed 5 arguments that Katie had submitted in her completed filing. It seems the document of hers that I have access to, which I found on Reddit, was more for the TRO than the DVRO, not the complete filing for the domestic violence restraining order. And I say that because the arguments he's responding to include stuff that wasn't necessarily laid out in the document I read. In any case, those reasons were that Seth was highly aggressive in his mannerisms, cursed and yelled at her, which he did not deny, but also did say that it wasn't a basis for a restraining order under the facts. She also said Seth was very angry, yelling at Sebastian, and Sebastian told her, "Daddy hit me." Seth denied hitting Sebastian entirely. She said that Seth yelled at her and Sebastian, then slammed a door, breaking it, which he did not deny and did say wasn't a basis for a restraining order under the facts. She said Seth had issues with his temper, which he denied and stated it wouldn't be a basis for a domestic violence restraining order, even if true. And finally, she said Seth was using drugs, which he denied and stated that it wouldn't be a basis for a DVRO, even if true. And then following that, he said, "As a result of these baseless allegations, I respectfully request the court deny Katie's request for a permanent domestic violence restraining order in full. There is no basis for her claims, and she fails to prove conduct under the Domestic Violence Prevention Act that would justify a restraining order." A lot of people on Reddit and YouTube noted that this seems like kind of a it didn't happen, but it's okay if it did sort of thing. But I read it as Seth covering all of the legal bases. This was likely not just Seth writing this document. It was likely Seth and a lawyer. So him saying, "I didn't do it and it wouldn't be basis even if I did," in my opinion, seems like it's probably the lawyer saying, "Hey, also point that out." Or perhaps the lawyer is the one who did the final edit of the document anyway.
I agree with that.
Speculation. Maybe Seth is just being weird here. Seth then went on to cover specific incidents not mentioned in Katie's document, which is why I think that this is probably not a response to that directly, but a response to the domestic violence restraining order filing as a whole. The most recent of those incidents was from August 16th, 2016, which was a day before the restraining order was granted, and Seth wrote that the incident in question involved claims that he was watching Katie sleep and yelling at her for not being willing to beat Sebastian. Seth categorically denied doing either of those things and said that what actually transpired was entirely different. According to Seth, he had asked Sebastian to clean his room, but Sebastian told him that he didn't need to listen to anything that Seth said, and that Seth should apologize for telling him what to do. Seth claims that he attempted to appropriately discipline him by sternly telling him that under no circumstances should he ever speak to any adult in that way. At this, he says that Sebastian ran downstairs, jumped into his mother's lap, and then told her that he hated his father and wished he would leave and never come back. Katie allegedly walked outside after Sebastian had calmed down, at which point Seth says that Sebastian apologized and told him he loves him and he wants to live with him after all. And yes, I know it sounds a little...
So, you know, there was, have you ever disciplined your children and they tell you they hate you or go to the other parent and say something about you? I mean, it happens, guys. It happens, but she blows up this big thing, makes it like something horrific happened, and Sebastian hated his dad and didn't want to be ever around him. Again, I cannot believe her. Her inconsistencies are ridiculous. Borderline personality peeps can't handle rejection either. This could explain a few things about KP and her about to lose CP. I agree. Yes, his dog is really pretty. It is interesting how no one came forward to confirm anything that KP claimed. No neighbors, no family, nothing. But then again, remember, she didn't tell her family. Didn't have police reports. Yeah. She started the parent alienation tactics before the divorce. She sure did. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It is very typical for children to try to play parents against each other, especially if he knows the parents aren't getting along, right? They're going to do that, guys. Kids will try to push the boundaries as much as they can, and it's up to the parents to let them know to first of all be united front, let them know they're not going to get away with that, right? I don't know of any child who hasn't tried that, including me as a child, right? Yes, Lacey's shaking in the background. She's back here. Yeah. She gets really nervous, and I keep forgetting to put on my diffuser for her. I need to do that. Yeah. Kids say what they say, and then sometimes they retract, especially after they realize they weren't able to get away with it. And then all of a sudden, and I see Sebastian as that kind of kid, don't you guys? Where he would probably say something in anger, but then really feel bad and be very loving and apologetic after. I see that in Sebastian for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it's because we've spent a year getting to know about Sebastian, right? And I don't know. That's what I feel. Yeah, yours did, and so did you. Yeah, exactly. But she made it out to be this great big deal, and it wasn't. Kids are going to push boundaries. It's just the way it is. Right? And that doesn't help anything. That does not help anything when oh, that always irritated me. I never even let my kids know what their dad did to me. And when my daughter, I don't know, I think she may have been in her late 20s, she called me one day and said, why didn't you ever tell me what dad did to you? Because I didn't want to paint a bad portrait of your dad to you. That's not fair, right? It's just wrong on so many levels. You don't do that. You do not do that. I don't care that I don't care what they did to me. As long as they didn't hurt my children, I'm not going to portray him badly. Right? Just not going to. Yeah, the judge didn't buy it. Yeah, I swear every boundary I pushed as a kid, my kids have gotten my mother's revenge. Exactly. Exactly. It happens. You know what they say, karma is. So it's funny. Um,
And then the whole bus clapped. Seth continued that after this incident, I was very upset, but I was never violent in any way. And he said the neighbor was in the house and watched the entire thing unfold. Supposedly, the neighbor asked what was wrong and said that the whole thing was kind of uncomfortable to witness, but Seth said he just wanted to go outside, have a cup of coffee, and calm down. He finished that story by reaffirming that he had not acted violently toward her or anyone in the house and had not yelled at her because she wouldn't beat Sebastian, her in this case being Katie. The second instance he addressed involved Katie's claim that on August 22nd, 2016, Seth was being belligerent and yelling at her and their son. He denied that this occurred at all, and from a legal standpoint, rightfully pointed out that this is not cause for a domestic violence restraining order. He explained that on this day, he and Katie had been arguing about how they were going to proceed with the divorce, which had been filed, but at the time they were still living together, and they needed to figure out how to handle that tension. He says that during that argument, he left the home and slammed the door behind him. But that is not what broke the door. According to him, the door was already broken. He didn't elaborate on the specifics of the argument, but he did say that he never once acted violently and never once did he encourage her to beat their son. The final instance noted in the document is a claim that on October 11th, 2016, Seth was angry at Sebastian and hit him as a result, which Seth categorically denied doing. He pointed out that Sebastian suffers from a rare condition called 6q27 chromosomal deletion syndrome, and one of the symptoms of that is it causes you to hit and bite yourself out of frustration. Seth explained that Sebastian has been known to throw himself to the ground during these incidents, and that this is a very common occurrence for him, and others have witnessed him doing this. And in support of this claim, he says he filed declarations from some of these witnesses. Seth did describe the events of that day in the filing, but he gave a much more detailed version of the story to the Pascal show on April 5th. To be clear, that is April 5th of this year, not April 5th of 2016. Seth claimed that on that day, he made Sebastian a deal, which was if the boy cleaned his room, then they could go swimming, because Sebastian, as all the parents have agreed, loves swimming. Seth said that he went off to go play a computer game and that every 30 to 45 minutes he would go and he would check up on Sebastian, but at no point had Sebastian cleaned his room. He also clarified that only he and Sebastian were in the home at the time because Katie was already down by the pool with some of her girlfriends. Finally, about 4 or 5 hours after he had told Sebastian to clean up so that they could go to the pool, he went up to check on him and found that the room was now more of a mess than before, and that Sebastian was sitting butt naked playing his Wii. Rather than admonishing Sebastian, rather than yelling at him, punishing him for not doing his chores, Seth says that he just simply went to his own room, put on his swim trunks, got his beach towel, and then walked past Sebastian's door. And he says that when he walked by Sebastian's door, Sebastian noticed and mentioned that he also wanted to go swimming. Seth told him that since he hadn't cleaned his room or made his bed, he was not allowed to go swimming. And this made Sebastian very upset. Sebastian allegedly stormed across the room, stomping his feet, and in the process stomped on a Hot Wheels car, then tripped and began to fall towards the door frame. Seth said that when this happened, he reached out and tried to put his hand between Sebastian's head and the wall, emphasizing that he'd much rather Sebastian hit his hand than the wood due to the fluid pocket on his brain. After ensuring Sebastian was okay, Seth says that he went downstairs and started to swim laps in the pool. And not long after that, Sebastian ran downstairs and jumped into his mom's lap and said, "Daddy hit me." It was at this point that he says Katie turned around and filed because we were in the middle of the divorce, still living in the same residence. She turned around and child abuse, domestic violence, and had a move-out order issued, and they served it like 3 days later. And I should be clear at this point that none of what he told Pascal on April 5th, 2024 contradicts anything in his 2016 filing, in which he notes that Katie never called the police and Katie never took Sebastian for any medical care as a result of this alleged incident. He finished by stating Katie never took any action whatsoever consistent with a parent whose child had been abused. Katie's allegation that I abused Sebastian in any way is completely false. Now, with regard to the more vague allegations of him having temper and drug issues, Seth argued that it was untrue that he yelled and screamed at her with balled fists, as she alleged, and that while he was on painkillers, they were legitimately prescribed. He agreed that he did yell at her at times and that they did argue, but that he never threatened her with violence. As for the drugs he was taking, they were for 9 herniated discs in his back, a torn meniscus in his left knee, and 3 tears in his right shoulder, all of which should be corroborable by his doctor. In addition, he stated that he was in physical therapy for his injuries, and whoever...
So, yes, he had a witness. Isn't that interesting? And I agree with you, K9. He hasn't lost it in the past 14 months. So he does know how to refrain. Yeah. The only time we've actually seen Seth lose it was recently. And it... I mean, I don't mean to laugh, but I didn't blame him. You know, he was going after Mr. Chris, right? And calling him a witch with a bee, right? And I did not blame him at all for what he did. But even then, he used his words, right? And guys, who in a divorce has not yelled or argued with your spouse? I don't know of anybody. It happens, right? It happens. And I could see why it would happen with Katie. I'm sorry, I just... right, he didn't attack women, right? Who is the one that attacks women and hits children with a belt? You know, there is no documents that support that Seth was guilty of any of this. But allegedly, there's 5 CPS reports and Chris's own words that he did hit Sebastian with the belt. And Katie agreed that he did hit Sebastian with the belt. They admitted it themselves. So who's guilty here of abuse? I mean, we've heard that Chris put an ex-wife in the hospital. I'm sure that there is documentation to support that. I think we all kind of agreed with Seth's description of CP. I agree. Women and children should be off limits, period. Doesn't matter. I saw something on X that Chris wrote about, he forwarded and said, I'm just going to leave this right here. And the quote was something about not disciplining your children and what could happen, that it's the reason why kids are the way they are these days or something like that. And I thought, you're an idiot. Nobody has ever said you shouldn't discipline your children. But there's a difference between discipline and abuse. Right? We can use our words. We can use our words.
For the physical therapist was, they should also have records of this, unless those records were destroyed. Now, them being destroyed would not necessarily be suspicious after 8 years. If they're digital, however, might be a little weird. Adding on to all of that, he said that he finds it ridiculous that Katie alleges she is in fear of him, as even if he was acting violently, he would not be able to physically abuse her due to his injuries. While I am in great physical pain, he argued, Katie is not only physically healthy, but as she is in the Navy, she has received training in physical combat techniques. She has no fear of me. That one, I have to say, feels a little flimsy, given that Seth seems to be a rather large man. But at the same time, Katie does not appear to be much of a small woman. And if Seth was legitimately that injured, I could see where he's coming from. The next portion of the document is his response to Katie's child custody order request, which, while is not explicitly described at any point in the document, it seems was designed to prevent Seth from seeing Sebastian, based on what Seth said in the document. Seth wrote,
And guys, I submit to you, what mother would want to stop her child from seeing their father if there's no real abuse? There's no evidence, there's no documentation of, as far as Seth goes, right? What mother would do that to their child? Now, I know that there are some women, like Ginger, I know that it's a different situation. And the courts agreed with you. But what mother would do that to their child just because she wanted to get back at him? I could have done that. My husband beat me. Black eyes, bloody lips. I mean, he beat me. I never, ever took it out on my children. You don't do that if you're a real mother. Yeah. A 15-year-old getting a belt. Yeah, I agree. To me, a belt is a weapon. It is. It is. And I do not understand any mother who has no reason, I'm just going to say it that way, who has no reason, like abuse or anything like that, for trying to keep their child away from the father. I think it's wrong. Show poodles. The kind of mother that would hook up. That's a really good point. I love that. You're absolutely right.
wrote, I find it disheartening that Katie alleges Sebastian has anything to fear from me. I have always been Sebastian's primary caregiver. As Katie is in the Navy and is stationed on board a ship, she works and is often deployed while I act as a stay-at-home dad. I care for Sebastian's day-to-day needs, and this is a continuous task given his special needs due to his condition. I love it and embrace it, even though it can be troubling at times. Sebastian and I have built a special bond due to the fact that I am always home with him, taking care of him. He has no reason to fear me. I should note that I have not verified this yet, but it seems that at this time, Sebastian had not yet been diagnosed with autism. Towards the end of the document, Seth outlined what he believed was really going on here, saying that Katie only filed this request for a domestic violence restraining order in order to gain a tactical advantage in our divorce. He suggested that Katie cooked up the domestic violence accusation as a way to kick him out of the house and to prevent him from seeing his son. Lastly,
Exactly.
Seth addressed Katie's request that the court order him to pay her attorney's fees, even though Seth was a stay-at-home dad with no significant income of his own, and Katie was an E5 in the Navy with, at this time, based on what I found on her LinkedIn, at least 5 years of experience. While not a huge payday, the salary and benefits for a Navy E5 with 4+ years of experience and 2 dependents are nothing to sneeze at. So basically, Seth's argument here was Katie doesn't need me to pay her attorney's fees. She can pay them herself. In fact, not only that, but Seth argued that since she made significantly more than he did, and because her request was, as he put it, baseless and unnecessary, it should be her paying for his attorney's fees, not the other way around. And then in his conclusion, he restated his main points, writing that Katie and Sebastian have no reason to fear me. I have never harmed, harassed, or threatened them. Katie's request for a domestic violence restraining order is simply a tactic she is using to try and get me kicked out of the marital residence and cease my contact with our son. I respectfully request the court deny her request in full. I also request the court order Katie to pay my reasonable attorney's fees to defend against her false accusations. In the end, the domestic violence restraining order did not go through, and it seems that Seth was granted shared custody with no specific time arrangements. Now, it is of course possible that Seth is everything Katie described and that he just got very lucky and managed to weasel out of these allegations. But I think we need to go through the claims and evidence here because they're all rather important to the point I'm trying to make. Looking back at this, Katie accused Seth of multiple incidences of child abuse, citing numerous witnesses, including teachers, neighbors, social workers, therapists, and naval personnel, as they would have had to process this alleged ban of Seth from the naval base. Included amongst her claims were accusations that Seth had hit Sebastian in the head in front of a teacher while being fully aware that his son had a pocket of fluid in his brain. She also said that while she was on deployment, a then 7-year-old Sebastian would be abandoned for long periods of time and her neighbors would have to tell him to go home and lock the door, but none of them called CPS. Katie also said that when she brought the temporary restraining order to Sebastian's school, they notified her that they had called CPS a week prior. And then, in addition to the accusations that involved witnesses, she also accused Seth of a number of other inappropriate and unacceptable behaviors. She claimed that he would frequently expose himself to Sebastian by walking around the house naked. She said that Seth would get angry at their son, throwing him to the ground and beating him, and that he would at times whip him repeatedly with a belt. And when it came to Seth's behavior towards her, she accused him of threatening her with violence and preventing her from seeking help or communicating with her family. The problem is that when I see all of this laid out, even if we totally ignore Seth's version of the story, it seems utterly impossible to me that she could be telling the truth given the outcome of the case. Considering the number of witnesses she claimed to have, her behavior in the 9 months between returning from deployment and filing for that TRO, and the resources she had through the military, it just doesn't add up. Seth was a stay-at-home dad while she worked on a military base. So she had plenty of time away from Seth in a place where he could only access with her permission. Due to that, I don't see how she could claim that Seth was preventing her from communicating with friends and family. Even if he was monitoring her calls and texts, she could have easily used a computer at work. Then there's the allegations of Seth abusing and abandoning Sebastian, which were supposedly witnessed by a teacher and by neighbors.
Well, in my opinion, I don't blame him for yelling at her about communicating with her family, right? Her mother is a registered SA offender. So I do not blame him, even if he did do that. I don't blame him in the very least. Yep, police were never called. Yep, liar, liar, right. Yeah, but it didn't work. It didn't work. So, you know, and Seth did mention that, I believe it was when she went to, was it her grandfather's funeral? Sebastian was FaceTiming with him, and he saw her mother in the room, and her mother was not supposed to be around any children. Registered SA offenders cannot be around any children. It doesn't say you can't be around any children except for your grandchildren. Doesn't say that. So Seth was right in getting upset with her for that. So.
Neighbors. Despite this, the court did not grant Katie a domestic violence restraining order, when testimony to these claims certainly should have won her the case. Finally, while not a claim with witnesses, there is the fact that she accused Seth of picking Sebastian up, throwing him to the ground, and then proceeding to beat him. Now keep in mind, this was not listed in the domestic violence restraining order petition. So this happened before August. This happened a while ago. However, she didn't file a police report, didn't take Sebastian to the hospital, and did not request a temporary restraining order at the time that this supposedly occurred. Instead, she waited several months and then chose to file for a TRO when Sebastian claimed Seth had hit him at a time that she did not witness it. So just to be clear here, when Katie actively witnessed Seth picking up an 8-year-old with a fluid pocket on his brain, slamming him to the ground and then beating him, that was not enough for a temporary restraining order.
And guys, here's the thing. Everything that we know about Katie, if Seth had really done that to Sebastian and she was trying to get him out of the house, she would have called the police. That is her personality. So the fact that she didn't means to me, in my opinion, allegedly, it never happened. Right? We don't even like it when registered SOs are living in our neighborhood, right? We don't want that. And by the way, MNJ, welcome in. We're glad to have you. So, yeah. I think that we know enough of her personality by now to know that if that really did happen, she would have called the police. So there would have been a record, and there is not. I do not understand these two at all. At all.
However, when Sebastian, clearly completely fine, ran downstairs and claimed he'd been hit at a time when Katie was not there to witness it, that's when she chose to file the order. To top all of it off, if this were true, then Katie's recent decision to allow Sebastian to move in with his father full-time would be remarkably irresponsible, if not criminally negligent. And yet, according to Chris, Katie, and Seth, the plan was in 2024 for Sebastian to move in with his father full-time. So in 2016, Seth is a horribly abusive person who is a danger to Sebastian, routinely beats him, does things that arguably could kill him given his condition, yells at him, screams at him, just all around horrible person, horrible parent. But in 2024, he's fine. Like I said, it's possible that Seth just got really, really lucky. But from what I'm seeing, it seems that nobody was able to offer convincing testimony in support of Katie. And that's not the only thing I found odd about her claims. You see, as I went through the allegations, I started to see a pattern in what Katie said and did about Seth's alleged abuse. Katie said that Seth hit Sebastian with a belt. Katie took out a TRO, which is something Chris did. Katie said that her ex-spouse was unstable, which is something Chris did. So why is that relevant? Well, that's what I've been working towards this whole time. If you take Chris, Katie, Nina, and Seth's stories all together, then I think there are some questions worthy of further investigation by the authorities.
Exactly. Exactly, right? And that is the key. Katie was afraid of what Sebastian would tell his dad after moving in with them. She's, even though they made this thing, she knew Chris wanted Faith there, whatever. And guys, in my opinion, allegedly, Katie never bonded with Sebastian. She didn't want to deal with his problems. It was easier for her not to deal with them. So Chris was one, in my opinion, I believe, that approached Seth about Seth taking Sebastian. That's what I think. But I don't think Katie wanted that. That's the last thing. She would not want Seth to have. She still hates Seth, in my opinion. She would not want Seth to have their son. She'd rather see her son gone than for him to be with Seth. That's my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's what I think. All right. Let's see what he says here.
After a few weeks of doing quite literally nothing but this, I think it's worth asking how long Chris and Katie have been together, how Sebastian and Faith factor into their relationship, and why it could be the key to understanding Sebastian's disappearance. In order to understand how all of this fits together, however, I think we need to start by laying out the complete timeline of events, beginning with Chris and Katie being stationed at the same base in December of 2015. After that, Katie filed for divorce from Seth in February of 2016 and a temporary restraining order against him in August of 2016. Meanwhile, Chris married Nina Gomez in the summer of 2016, and she became pregnant that September. Shortly after that, Nina moved home to Albuquerque, and she claims this is because Chris was not supporting her and encouraged her to get an abortion. Then, Chris was allegedly caught disposing of Nina's things in mid-April of 2017, and this was supposedly witnessed by his neighbors. Faith was born in June of 2017, after which Chris suggested that Nina move to his hometown of Hendersonville. After that move, Chris and Nina got in a fight over a text message from a female coworker of Chris's at the end of August or beginning of September 2017. And I want to be clear here that it was Chris who said it was a coworker. Chris filed a temporary protective order against Nina in mid-September of 2017, but lost the attempt to get a full protective order at the beginning of October, allowing Nina to return to New Mexico and file for divorce and custody there. We also know, based on their own words, that Chris and Katie were living together at the time of Sebastian's assault by that older boy, which can only have occurred in 2017 because Sebastian was 8 at the time. Chris and Nina's divorce was finalized in August of 2018, and Chris almost immediately filed a motion to sanction Nina for allegedly not following the agreed-upon parenting plan in October of 2018. Nina then motioned for permission to relocate within the state of New Mexico on April 12th of 2019, and Chris motioned to prevent it. Possibly as a result of whatever happened during those proceedings, on August 21st of 2019, Chris was ordered by the court to take 24 hours of parenting skills classes, as well as 12 hours of high conflict behavior skill training, which he objected to on September 3rd. So just to be clear here with the timeline, on August 21st, 2019, Chris received a court order saying he needed parenting skills classes. Chris's objection was rejected, and he informed the court of his completed courses on November 19th of 2019, and it seems COVID put a pause on the whole affair until Nina motioned to modify the parenting plan in April of 2021. The plan was amended in October, but there's no details on what any changes were or if Chris objected to them. Almost a year later, in August of 2022, Nina switched Faith from the local public school, Bosque Farms Elementary, to a Native American academy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it was at this point that Chris motioned to relocate Faith to Tennessee and to grant him primary custody because apparently this was an unapproved change in schooling. Nina, on the other hand, says that she moved her to the academy because it was closer to where the other 2 children went to school, and she was trying to make the commute easier for everybody. After both sides presented their cases for why this was bad versus why this was good, it seems that the court sided with Nina yet again. Interesting little tidbit about this is that about a month after Chris motioned to get full custody of Faith, he closed on the current Proudfoot home in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Now, I can't say for certain, but that would suggest that he put the offer on the house in, July or August of 2022, before or when he filed for custody of Faith. Not much in the court record for another year or so, but in September of 2023, Chris requested a hearing, though the reason for doing so is unclear. The motion was for a written report on relocation, but beyond that, there's no information. Whatever the reason for the motion, however, on November 16th of 2023, Nina was ordered to appear before the court to show cause via Zoom, and that hearing was to take place on January 2nd, 2024. On December 27th, 2023, Nina was served with the same order to appear before the court on January 2nd that she had received on November 16th, 2023. And according to Nina, this whole thing with her being served those documents again was a setup to make her look crazy so that they could then, at the January 2nd hearing, file an emergency ex parte motion for modification of custody and a psychological evaluation of Nina, with the evidentiary hearing scheduled for March 5th, 2024. Before they got to that hearing, however, on February 26, 2024, Sebastian Rogers was reported missing at around 6:30 a.m. after Katie claimed she woke up and he was not in the home. Chris filed for a continuance in his custody case on February 29th and then again on March 19th before filing a motion to seal the records of that custody case on March 25th, which you may remember is the same day they appeared on Nancy Grace. Affidavits and subpoenas were thrown around for a few months after this until June 6th, when Chris filed an emergency ex parte motion, which I believe was intended to force Nina to send Faith to live with him for the summer, per their parenting plan. Nina responded the very next day with an objection, but her objection was rejected on the 10th, and she had to send Faith to stay with Chris for the summer. The most recent update to this case, per the court records, as of shooting this on July 29th, 2024, is that Chris has filed a motion to return to the status quo and yet again sanction Nina, who currently, so far as I'm aware, has Faith. So, with all of that in mind, I want law enforcement to consider the following facts. Chris and Katie Proudfoot have avoided saying precisely when they met, and as we know, it's possible they met as early as December 2015. Katie accused Seth of doing many of the same things in 2016 that Nina would go on to accuse Chris of doing in 2017, and followed the same legal playbook that Chris would a year later when trying to take Faith. Chris Proudfoot has been married 5 times in about 25 years. He was in the military the whole time, and service members are known to sometimes marry just for the benefits. To elaborate on that, when Chris married Nina, he would have received better housing and benefits as a husband with 3 dependents, even after Nina moved back to Albuquerque, so long as she didn't divorce him. When Katie divorced Seth, she would have lost those same benefits, which would have downgraded her lifestyle. And we know that Chris married Nina around the same time that Katie kicked Seth out. We know that Nina did not move back to San Diego at any point, and that shortly after Faith was born, she moved to Hendersonville at Chris's request. And for most of this time, she stayed with Chris's mother. This put her in a position where she had no one around to support her if something were to go wrong with Chris or his family. In simple terms, she was as isolated as she could possibly be. At this time, Chris was still stationed and spending the majority of his time in San Diego, now without any possibility of Nina sneaking up on him, because his family could tell him if she were going to do so. When he did return to Hendersonville to help move Nina into their new apartment, he received a text from a female coworker, as he put it, which Nina interpreted to be romantic in nature, and she accused him of cheating. Now consider that Chris was in the Navy and stationed at a base in San Diego, and Katie was in the Navy and stationed at that same base in San Diego, meaning she could be considered a female coworker. As we addressed, Chris has been extremely cagey about when he and Nina met, but I think we can triangulate it. And here's how we do that. Chris said he'd been around for half of Sebastian's life at a time when Sebastian had just turned 15, which gives us a window of 7 to 8 years, or 6 to 9 if we're being generous. Seth said that when Sebastian was assaulted, Chris and Katie were living together at the time, which is something that the Proudfoots have confirmed in several interviews. Seth also said that Sebastian was 8 when the assault happened, which means that it must have happened by the end of 2017. On top of that, we know that sometime between mid-July of 2017 and the end of August 2017, Chris received a text message from a female coworker that Nina interpreted as cheating. If we put all of that together, then Chris and Katie started living together before December of 2017. And based on the fact that Chris allegedly received this message at the end of August 2017, it seems very likely to me that Chris and Katie began dating before Chris even filed that TPO against Nina. We also know that after the custody grab failed and Nina filed for divorce, Chris spent the next several years pestering her in court over every little thing and filing for primary custody multiple times. And since we know that Chris and Katie began living together at the very latest in December of 2017, we also know that Katie has been a parent in Chris's household since that point. And therefore, she must have been involved to some extent in this custody case. She must have been an active participant of some kind. That is to say, at the very least, she was aware of these court proceedings. Now, if you recall that weird, vague story that Chris told from the very beginning of this episode, all of that seems to have happened sometime after the Proudfoots moved to Hendersonville, so that's probably between 2022 and 2024. They may have returned to Hendersonville as early as 2022, but that's the earliest I can confirm that they were there. In any case, when that Duchess panel asked Chris if there was a reason he wouldn't want Sebastian around his daughter, he told them there's some things that can be spoke of and there's some things that will not be spoke of, and personal issues inside my family are strictly that they have no bearing on this investigation. The cops are well aware of everything involving specifics, and that's quite honestly, I know this is going to sound snarky and rude, but it's really nobody's business as to that because it has no bearing on this case. Okay? And for the record, I will say this, all 3 parents have an agreement and we all understand this. That was not an answer to the question, but thankfully, Chris did tell us that all three parents understand this, and Seth told us that Chris didn't want Sebastian around his daughter. I would be willing to consider this is kind of a he said, she said thing, if not for the fact that Chris all but admitted to it by describing an entire incident involving the cops and family members while actively shipping Sebastian off to Seth as he's vying for custody of Faith. Just to be clear, Chris most recently began making moves to get custody of his daughter towards the end of 2023, which is around the same time that he approached Seth and suggested Sebastian move in with him. We also know that Nina's story about what happened at the airport is at least somewhat truthful because the court records show that there was a motion for a psych eval against her paired with custody changes. To my knowledge, the Proudfoots actually haven't denied any of Nina's claims, though it is possible, if unlikely, that they're unaware of them. And in case Chris happens to be watching this, I'm perfectly willing to be completely wrong about you. In fact, I'd love to be, but you have some explaining to do. And finally, we know that the Proudfoots left town in the middle of the search after what has all but universally been described as a lackluster effort to find their son. And on top of that, we know that Chris has lied so very many times. Anyway, now that I've put all of that out on the table, I'm realizing how aggressively convoluted the whole thing is, and I'm just hoping that I've been able to lay it out in a way that makes sense for you. Now, for the last couple of weeks, I have been telling you guys that I have a hypothesis, and I have been sitting on it and not releasing what it is.
So let me see what I missed here. Right? Which law enforcement officer signed off on those classes for CP? Huh. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Sebastian thought he couldn't tell his dad anything. I'm sure they threatened him. Yeah, she hasn't spoken with Seth since Sebastian went missing. And the thing is, show poodles, I don't think Katie knows how to show compassion. You know, that's typical of a narcissist. So let's see what else. Yeah, I'm sure mommy told him that he didn't need any classes, that he was A-okay, because you know what? He probably mirrors his mommy in his parenting skills. And if it was good enough for her, it should be good enough for him. Yeah, it was probably online. I mean, I don't know. That's very true. They didn't work. Yeah. You know, it's really true. Um I know that those classes are meant to do good, but guys, it's like any other class. If you don't want to be there, if you don't want to take it, you're not going to listen. You're not going to learn anything, right? So they could force abusers to take them all day long, but if they really don't want to change, they're not going to, right? February 14, 2021, married and living in an apartment in Hendersonville, allegedly. And by 2022, they were wanting to get rid of him. Yep. Australia has 26,974 million people with 200. Wow. Yeah. Tennessee has 7,228 million people with 6,600 unsolved missing persons. Yep. Yeah. A narcissist with borderline personality disorder. That's scary if you think about it. Yeah. It's really sad, but let's listen to what he has to say for his synopsis here. His hypothesis.
And some people in the comments understandably asked if I was ever going to give the hypothesis, or if I was just going to keep saying I had one so that we could draw out as many views from this case as possible. I am assuming those people are not familiar with our channel. That said, I understand where they're coming from, and I was being legitimate when I said that I was holding off on it because I wanted to compile as much as I could first so that I would be confident about what I was suggesting. I am now finally mostly confident in my hypothesis. So without anything further, here's my hypothesis. Call me crazy, but consider the following scenario. Chris Proudfoot married Nina Gomez for the benefits and had no intention of living with her. At some point during their marriage, possibly even prior to it, he began dating Katie Proudfoot. Chris was upset when Nina got pregnant because that meant a commitment beyond a legal contract. When she decided to have the baby anyway, Chris decided he wanted to keep his daughter but not his wife and made arrangements to separate them. He had Nina move to Tennessee in order to both isolate her from her family and surround her with his, and to ensure that the courts would be more favorable to him as a local. He then waited until an opportunity arose to separate Nina from Faith and filed the TPO, assuming that the justice system would side with him, but he miscalculated and lost the case. Then, at some point during the last few years, something occurred with Sebastian that made Chris distrust him enough not to want him around Faith, and maybe interfered with his attempts to get custody. And that is where I get stuck, and I'm not sure how to progress without further answers from law enforcement or more research into the interviews given by the Proudfoots. But I find it extremely unlikely that Sebastian left the house on his own, barefoot, into the cold, based on the fact that he notably hated walking barefoot outdoors, and dogs were unable to track a scent just hours later. If he didn't leave barefoot, then he may have left wearing shoes, but that doesn't explain the decision to leave into the cold without his phone or his Nintendo Switch. And there's also the fact that not a single camera saw him. That would suggest to me that he left in a car, but he certainly didn't drive, which means someone must have driven him. There are very few people that Sebastian would trust enough to get into a car with, and even fewer people who had access to the home. Sebastian had no contact with anyone but approved adults, so we're talking about somebody who must be very close to him and likely very, very trusted by Katie and Chris. So aside from Seth, his father, it seems like the only people who would have access to Sebastian at this time would be his own family. And after looking through everything, while I'm not going to say that we can rule out Seth being abusive in the past, I think we can rule Seth out as a suspect in this case. Is it possible that someone, be it Katie, Kathy, Melissa, or any other member of the Proudfoot clan, spirited Sebastian away in the middle of the night to hide him somewhere? Or maybe Sebastian never made it home that night at all, since the last time anyone other than family saw him was as they were leaving dinner Sunday night. I doubt Katie wanted her son dead, and I don't think that she would stand by Chris if Sebastian was, which means that kidnapping by family is, so far as I'm concerned, the most likely scenario. But why? Chris had gotten what he wanted with Sebastian moving out of the house, so there was no reason to make him disappear on that front. Having your one child go missing while you're actively fighting for custody of the other probably doesn't help your case, so I doubt this was plan A, so to speak. The only thing that I could imagine would warrant this would be Sebastian throwing a wrench into the custody battle, and this would probably be related to the abuse by Chris. From there, I can see two main possibilities. The first is that should Sebastian testify in this custody battle, or should he be allowed to give a statement in this custody battle? Well, he's autistic. His testimony would be very honest, and a very honest testimony from Sebastian would be very bad for Chris. The second is that Chris misrepresented his most recent encounter with CPS after he beat Sebastian with a belt for at least the second time, and the case was more serious than he let on. Now remember, Chris said in his interviews that this CPS worker came to the house, took Sebastian outside, and then told Sebastian, hey, buddy, when you're being punished, you shouldn't tell anyone. You're going to get your dad in trouble. Don't do that. Don't report when you're being punished. A lot of you rightfully noted that the way that Chris described Sebastian's conversation with that caseworker did not sound like any caseworker you'd ever heard of. And I have to agree. So just really quick, let's go back and take a look at what Chris said his encounter with that CPS worker was like when Sebastian was 15, okay? She's like, oh, hey, I'm already, she's like, don't tell me anything, but I'm going to tell you what I know happened. And I said, okay. She goes, boom, boom, boom. She told me exactly what happened. I said, yes, ma'am. She goes, oh my God. I said, yes, ma'am. This is how it's been. Sebastian thought by telling on me, making it sound like I was so horrible that I was going to get in trouble over something stupid. It was like, no, Sebastian, you got punished, man. You got punished. And he was like, but, and I was like, you got punished. And the lady took him outside. She goes, Sebastian, just because you get in trouble and you get punished, you need to understand when you go and say things about people and you lie and you fabricate things and you make it sound worse than what it is, sir, you can get in trouble for that. So we had that happen. The lady was like, I am so sorry. I said, no, he's just a child. He's upset is what it is. I'm okay with it. You know, he set that back down at the dinner table and was like, see, eat your food. And we went back and everything's been fine. By the way, he also said that this was the second time they'd had that specific caseworker. And here, where was it? Yeah. So he shows, you know, he makes the report. They come to the house, and the lady who comes to the house is the same lady she's had a case before. Now, mind you, he said that there was only one incident with a belt and CPS only showed up once, but that's neither here nor there. We know he's a liar. But, you know, so the CPS worker shows up a second time. And as we all know, social workers are always very quick to be very friendly to parents the second time they're called to that house. In case it wasn't clear, we're into the pure speculation part. So, you know, not buying that one. We already know that Chris has lied about CPS. Why would he not lie about what happened when CPS came to the door? The only way the report from that CPS visit gets out there is if the police charge the Proudfoots and they use it as evidence in a trial, or if a CPS caseworker working out of that office were to leak it. So yeah, I would not be shocked at all if Chris lied about that encounter. It just would not surprise me. But the question then is, would missing child look better than abused child to a custody court? But just to reiterate, bring things back, reset, make sure we're all on the same page about where we are. The suggestion was that maybe that CPS visit was a little bit more serious than he let on, and he did not want the New Mexico courts finding out about it. Would CPS or the custody court be less concerned about a missing child than an abused child? I frankly do not know, and it's not a question I ever thought I'd have to ask. But also, how would that work once the case is over? I mean, does he miraculously appear back in Hendersonville and, you know, tragically, due to the trauma and his being autistic, he goes nonverbal and refuses to talk about anything that happened, and then they just kind of send him on his way? Now, of course, I have to remind everybody that this is a hypothetical scenario that I feel is possible based on the evidence that I have accumulated and presented. My sole interest is to explain my findings in the hopes that they may lead to new avenues in the search for Sebastian Rogers. I am in no way asserting that the hypothetical scenario I described today is to be understood as an allegation of any kind, nor am I making the claim that any party is responsible for Sebastian's disappearance. By the time this video goes live, all of the research that I have compiled will have already been sent to the FBI and the TBI, as well as the Davidson and Shelby County Sheriff's Departments. I genuinely do believe that Sebastian was kidnapped, if not by his family, then by somebody else with access to the Proudfoot home. And either way, I do not see a reason to believe that he's not still alive out there somewhere. For my part, I am praying day in and day out that he is, because I know that is precisely what I would want from everyone if my little brother was missing. My little brother with autism, of whom I see so much in Sebastian, and for whom I would never stop searching, no matter what the cost.
That was really good, guys. What do you think? That was awesome. And I agree, right? I agree completely. Let's see what I missed here. So, yeah, poor Sebastian, for sure. I like that he left out Sumner County Sheriff's Office and he sent it in before his show. Yes, I like that too. Um, I'm glad that he did that because get this off. Okay. Because, you know, every possible scenario should be looked at, right? Um, I think that when he did do this, it's come out since then because he did this about 3 months ago and put this all together with his hypothesis. Um, since then, it has been stated that there was some kind of recording device in Katie's car that showed Sebastian in the car as they were pulling into the driveway. So, that's alleged. I don't know if it's true, but that's what I've heard. So, you know, if that's the case, then he did make it home, which coincides with the 3 a.m. flashlight video and the car, right? That the mob crew has done such a good job on. Excellent job on. So, you know, I like the fact, he wasn't accusing anybody, right? But he said he felt he could exclude Seth. Would have no reason, right, for getting rid of his son. He pointed out, however, that Chris had a very good reason to try and get rid of Sebastian. Katie had a very good reason to try and get rid of Sebastian. Because he brings up a good point. If Sebastian would have testified in his custody hearing for Faith, could have been detrimental to him. Guys, CPS does not make 5 reports for no reason. I'm just saying, CPS was never called on me once, ever. The whole time that I raised my children. So, I mean, you get 5 reports on you, there's something seriously wrong. Seriously wrong, in my opinion. So in answer to my question, was he abducted by his stepfather? I don't know. We can't say that for sure, can we? Right? We can't say that for sure. But if the last report was meaningless, then Ellie wouldn't be keeping it secret. Right. Well, I don't think that law enforcement can, only in a trial can that stuff come out. I don't think CPS reports can ever come out, no matter what. So there are good people who have lost their children for less than 5 CP, right? Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I remember back when I was raising my kids, um, you know, th- to have CPS come to your door would have been horrific. It would have been awful. And, you know, because at that time they would take your kids away pretty quickly, pretty easily, right? That was like back in the early 80s. So they would They didn't pull any punches. They take your children away from you without hardly any evidence of anything from what I heard back then. I don't know because I never had any dealings with them, but that's always what I heard about them. Oh, they didn't share that one with Seth? Um, but Seth got his from getting a lawyer. It had nothing to do with law enforcement. That's how he got the CPS reports. He had to get a lawyer to go after CPS to get them. My opinion, his family connections are why nothing came from 5 reports and why Seth was easily discarded by the feet and whoever. I agree. Said all along, there's corruption, right? I have felt that. I'm not going to go after, law enforcement because Seth has asked us all not to, publicly. I don't talk to Seth. I've never talked to Seth, but that is what he has said. And so I'm not going to go against his wishes because if they're working with him and he feels he's getting good information from them, I don't want to jeopardize that for him, right? Whether I agree with, them or not, I would never want to do anything to get Seth upset, right? I just wouldn't. And there's family working at CPS. Well, that wouldn't surprise me either. I agree. Showpoodle says, seems like Sumner County has a lot to clean up. Where's the community? Locals need to act. There should be thousands at those vigils for Sebastian, not hundreds. Well, I mean, it is a smaller community. So it is a smaller community. It's not, it's a, let me see, what is the population? Population of Hendersonville, Tennessee. Really? Well, that's not so small. It said 61.75 thousand is what it said to me. 22,000 seems more like it. Yeah. I think people in that area are scared, guys. Think about it. One of the neighbors, well, they were threatened, but one of the neighbors was driving up the road and Chris stood out in front of them and stopped them and started screaming at them. And you know how he is with his temper, right? So, people are scared. I would be afraid. I guess it wouldn't stop me though from going to a vigil. Hello, Lolo. I really hope the reason LE is taking longer than we would all like is because they are building an airtight case against the Proudfoots. I'd like to believe that, but I think they do have a lot of evidence. But what we've been told is the DA wants a body. Um, and I just encourage you to Google the DA and you'll know why. The DA is the one that decides when charges will go through. Police can go ahead and arrest somebody because they think they have charges, but it's up to the DA. He can drop them. So they know they have to appease the DA in order to get anything into court. Um, and what else is interesting is that the DA, of all people, was at the command center that first week. Why? Why is the DA at a command center for a missing child the first week he's missing? Because at this point, they don't know that there's foul play yet, right? Remember, isn't that what Craddock kept saying? There's no foul play, no evidence of foul play, no evidence. Oh, I got so sick of hearing that. Even Seth in his response on Josh states he does not understand why they have not acted on CP outbursts. Yeah. Yeah, I got 67,000 too, but I mean, I could be wrong. That seems like a lot. Remember, I lived in the area. But I mean, I don't know. I agree, Granny. Seth is the one who is living this and having to work with law enforcement. None of us carry the burden Seth is carrying every day without his son. KP owes Seth a conversation one-on-one, just the two of them. Yeah, well, she's not going to. We all know why, right? First of all, she hates him. Secondly, she, like Mr. Yummy says, and for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about with Mr. Yummy, my chat has dubbed Deception Detective as Mr. Yummy, okay? So, as he says, they have guilty knowledge, and I agree with him. Gotcha. No, I agree more with what you said, 22,000. I would agree with that more than 67K. But I don't know where I find that hard to believe because I lived in Portland. So, 67,000 seems like a lot for Hendersonville, but I could be wrong. I mean, that's what it says, right? K9, but I'm not, I find that hard to believe. That's a good point. DA was there because KP lawyered up on day one. Yeah, maybe guys, they're not stupid, right? They're not stupid. And at that time, we had the old sheriff. It wasn't Craddock. But the old sheriff conveniently fell and hit his head at a conference. I question that one too, but so I don't know. But let's do our grannyism for today. Who are we talking to here? Take your pick. Tell the truth or someone will tell it for you. And that is a quote, guys. So just saying, that is a quote. Tell the truth or someone will tell it for you. And there's somebody else that knows something, guys. There's somebody else out there that knows something, in my opinion. I'm going to take the stand as far as my title of this, and this is the last 4 parts. But I'm going to take the stand. Was the stepfather involved? I don't know. Yeah, orange does look good on him. I agree. But I'm going to take the stand that was the stepfather involved? I don't know. In my opinion, I think so. But we don't have the evidence to say for sure, right? Allegedly. I think law enforcement may have, I think, oh, thank you, Noni. I'm glad. I like to make people smile. But we may not know. But the ones who have guilty knowledge know. And I truly believe Sebastian was abducted by family, in my opinion. And guys, if I'm wrong when all this comes out and comes to light, because the truth always comes into the light, guys, always. It's just never in our timing, right? It's never in our timing. But if it comes out that I'm wrong, I will not have a problem even putting it on a thumbnail saying, I was wrong, guys. Right? That's why I always say I could be wrong, allegedly, in my opinion, because we don't know for sure. We think we know who's responsible, but we don't know. I believe it's the Proud Feet. But, like I said, I could be wrong. Many of us believe that, but we could be wrong. We could be wrong. I don't think I am, though. In my opinion. So, all right. Well, guys, that's all I have for tonight. So I want to thank you all for being here. Please, please, please hit the like button on your way out. Make sure you turn your notifications to all so that you are notified when we go live or put out other videos. Yeah. I don't have a problem saying I was wrong. Right? Just like I don't have a problem saying that who I think is responsible. Right? Yeah. Guilty knowledge. They were, you're welcome, show poodles. They were, Katie, at least, was in the home with him that night. So she has to know more than what she's saying. And simply because Chris is married to her, he has to know more as well, in my opinion, right? So there we have it. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate each and every one of you. You guys are awesome. I love our chats together. So thanks so much, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you for watching another episode of Granny's Crime Busters. We really appreciate each and every one of you. Don't forget to subscribe and like and even share the content. You can follow us on any of our other social media platforms at YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. We really appreciate you guys, and you can also email us at granniescrimebusters@gmail.com. Thank you so much, and we will see you on the next one. Thanks, guys.